about how to sell the benefits of gigabit networks for users. And we're going to focus on gigabit applications, how they are emerging, and what additional things need to happen to help bring them up to full speed. Whenever we talk about gigabit networks and the activities that individuals are doing and municipalities are doing and businesses are doing, the topic is still raised. Well, why do you need a gig, right? And I know our experts from today will really be able to speak to that, and I'll introduce them in just a few minutes. But we have top officials from US Ignite and Orange Telecom, and they'll be speaking to both the public benefits and the mass market benefits of gigabit applications. So let me go ahead and kick off a couple of remarks here about some of the killer apps for the gigabit economy, why they're necessary. The Pew Research Center put forward a report last October about gigabit applications. There was a great quote by David Weinberger of Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet Society. He predicted there will be full, always-on, 360-degree environmental awareness, a semantic overlay of the real world, and full-presence massive open online courses. Plus, Skype won't break out nearly as much. And as we sometimes experience, even today, connectivity does break up, and that is an ever-present issue for those who use the web to make sure that you have the most robust connection necessary. I just wanted to review a couple of the points that Pew Research Center made in this report, Killer Apps in the Gigabit Age. People's basic interactions and their ability to be together and collaborate will change in the age of vivid telepresence, enabling people to instantly meet face-to-face in cyberspace with no travel necessary. I think, again, we're all familiar with telepresence, telecommuting, webinars, the way that they bring us together, but there's still remarkably few webinars that have the kind of degree of connectedness that that is the reason people have conferences. So I think that the point being made in this first item is that the reality and the robustness of these kinds of connections will indeed make it seem like you're there without being there. The second point that Pew Research Center made was that augmented reality will expand people's sense and understanding of their real-life surroundings, and virtual reality will make some spaces, such as gaming worlds and other simulated environments, even more compelling places. Both at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas last month and at Sundance here in Park City just 2 weeks ago, the Oculus Rift is a big hit. People are talking and building digital media platforms around these kinds of augmented reality tools. Again, this is a function of greater bandwidth, of greater connectivity, and it's still very, very emerging, very embryonic, but we do see this an increasing robustness around augmented reality. And I'll look forward to our two guests' observations on how real this is in both the public space and the commercial space. Pew Research Center's third point is that the connection between humans and technologies will tighten as machines gather, assess, and display real-time personalized information in an always-on environment. Again, just a peek around the floor at the Consumer Electronics Show shows the ways that people are constantly documenting, building their own personal big data sets. Again, it's the connectivity that's flowing from these that is in some ways driving a lot of interest in gigabit networks. Specific economic and social sectors are going to be especially impacted, and I think health and medicine and education are really very often mentioned. When I was heading up the Partnership for Connected Illinois project in the land of Lincoln, we talked incessantly about the National Broadband Plan and about the national purposes. Medicine and education are two of those principal purposes. And so, there's a huge public component as well as a commercial opportunity for companies that are seeking to be more involved in the home health care market and educational opportunities. Many companies here in Utah on the Wasatch Front that are dealing with disruptive educational efforts that can take advantage of these connectivity. Of course, Pew Research also notes that new digital divides may open as people gain different opportunities on different timelines with different tools. I think the issue of digital equity is a very real one. It's one reason why you do see many municipalities that go down the route of gigabit networks want to ensure a universal build-out for all citizens. And this, of course, is in contrast both with some of the models we see from traditional telecoms as well as new entrants and some ways that they're approaching their build-out structure. Pew gathered many experts and got a lot of reactions, including, "I have no idea. The best internet apps are yet to emerge. If I knew, I wouldn't tell you." And there's just a huge, who knows factor, and that's just going to be inevitable. In some ways, you have to really applaud the motivation that 5 years ago, in fact, it was 5 years ago this week, that Google Fiber announced their Think Big with the Gig Challenge, which ultimately led to Kansas City being selected as the first gigabit city by Google, Provo, Utah, Austin, Texas, and now they've announced just 2 weeks ago, 4 new cities: Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, and Raleigh, all being built out. And again, the motivation was to get people to think of what are those uses that we haven't thought of yet. Final point that Pew Research Center made in this report is that advances will be gradual. They argue bandwidth is not the issue. I'm not sure I agree with that point. But they do note that the United States will lag because widespread gigabit network is not easily achieved. Of course, that's one of the reasons we're here at Kirton McConkie and through this webinar is to help you know what are the things you need to do to plan and build and avoid mistakes in building your gigabit networks. My next and last slide is just a kind of a mind map, if you will, of where, in what domain are the gigabit applications. The National Broadband Plan, could you pop this down just a tad so we can see the bottom side, like is that the bottom? All right. It truncated one entry there, but that's okay. The National Broadband Plan articulates economic opportunity, education, healthcare, government performance, public safety, energy environment, and civic engagement as the sort of 7 areas motivating the use and adoption of the National Broadband Plan. This will stand to be corrected by our next guest from US Ignite, but when I reviewed their materials in a previous conference, they were focusing on applications in workforce, education, healthcare, public safety, energy, transportation, advanced manufacturing. And so across the row, you see that economics and workforce is in many of these a driving force. Education and healthcare, which Pew highlighted, are very, very significant. That different entities may focus on different domains for gigabit applications. One community in Northeast Ohio has been a leader in building gigabit networks in the Northeast Ohio region. They have focused on these areas: economic development, schools, healthcare, and public service. And then a final example, this is a gigabit community that I worked with in Illinois, Onlight Aurora. They were winner of the Gigabit Challenge in Illinois. They set their sights on business, improvement of business, the schools, a medical center, social services, and arts and entertainment. as a sector of the economy. So we can just ponder for a moment that it may be the case that more of the applications being discussed now are in these spaces that have a strong public component. Our second guest will talk a lot about what commercial uses are out there for gigabit applications. And again, I hope this will be a lively discussion of interest for those of you on this webinar who are strongly considering building gigabit networks in your cities. We want to go ahead and invite you to put your questions forward, and we will get to as many of those as we can. I will go ahead now and introduce our next panelist, who will tell us about US Ignite. So who's right here with us in our office in Utah. Glenn Reichert is the founder and chief information officer at US Ignite, and he has a very strong background in innovation and computer networking. He implemented the first interconnection point in College Park, Maryland, and was recognized for this achievement by being inducted into the Internet Hall of Fame in August of 2013. He's also worked as academic CAO at University of Maryland, as well as serving as executive vice president and CTO for Novell in the 1990s, serving also as CEO of National Lambda Rail. He's founded or co-founded 5 startups. Prior to US Ignite, he's included Centerbeam, which was sold to Earthlink in 2013. Glenn's a great resource for many in the nation, but we like to claim as our own, being based here in Salt Lake City, and really pleased you can be with us, Glenn, to tell us about US Ignite, some of the things you're doing with a real focus on these gigabit applications for cities and public uses.
Well, thank you very much, Drew. It's very much a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think you're going to have 2 guests who are really going to be able to address the applications issues. I know that my compatriot at Orange is very unique in that they've actually started a Silicon Valley Giga Studio just to take a look at these applications. But US Ignite is all about smart gigabit city applications. That's our sole mission. We do not have any fiber that we string ourselves. We do not have any gigabit wireless that we string ourselves. But our mission is to go and help cities become smarter and help their citizens by taking better advantage of these kinds of advanced infrastructure that they may have in their city. US Ignite is a public-private partnership. This is a picture of the public part of that partnership. This is the White House South Auditorium. The time is June 2012. And we've gotten together a number of government, private sector officials to help bring US Ignite into existence. John Donovan of AT&T gave a keynote address. We were welcomed to the White House by John Holdren, the President's Science Advisor. Subra Suresh, the Director of the National Science Foundation at that time, announced the US Ignite initiative and NSF's role in it. They're now providing $10 million a year of funding to programs that will go and help develop smart gigabit city applications. It's on the application side. We also had the head of the Federal Communications Commission at that time, Julius Genachowski, the head of the NTIA, Larry Strickling, Department of Commerce, because of the important economic development issues that are present in these applications for smart gigabit cities, and the Chief Technology Officer for the United States. So we actually have a great cast to go and get things started. As you heard from Drew, we're about next generation applications, and you remember that column where he had 6 entries for me. Those are represented by the orange entries going around from the top. I'll just mention them again: clean energy, advanced manufacturing, public safety, transportation, healthcare, and education. I will say, Drew, that we don't limit ourselves tightly to these, but it is a set of public benefit applications because we do have public funding involved as well as private funding and the participation of numerous private funds. And for anybody out there who would like to get an early jump on their charitable giving for this year, there's also the US Ignite nonprofit. That's the private part, and we are a 501c3. All gifts are tax deductible to the extent of the law. So we would invite any of those. We have three important goals. One is to come up with and demonstrate and help people understand the value of 60 compelling next-generation applications that would not have been possible without gigabit cities. What can we do with gigabit cities that other cities can't do? What are their advantages in healthcare, education? How can we make that happen? We would like to see 200 communities that are gigabit-based by the end of 2017. And I think that if you count suburbs and such, as Google sometimes does, we may get close to that, including the efforts of 100 cities from AT&T Gigapower. Right here in Utah, we've got CenturyLink announcing Salt Lake City as a gigabit city for them, and many other gigabit cities going around the country, and to coordinate best practices among these folks. So we're happy to work with everyone else in this smart gigabit city space, and particularly our role is to help lead on the application side of that. We have a number of partners around the United States. You can see here Cisco and Google and Ciena and NEC and JDSU and HP and Verizon and Comcast. These commercial and corporate partners are very interested in seeing these new applications come into being because, of course, they will be providing the infrastructure over which this runs. Again, we do not do infrastructure. We depend on our municipal partners, our corporate partners, to provide the infrastructure that's needed in the smart cities. But we do like to work with them, academia, research and education networks, foundations, chambers of commerce, civic organizations, to put together the real core of a smart city so that they can develop and take advantage of these kinds of applications. We also work with Mozilla. This is the homepage probably a couple months ago from Mozilla Ignite. You can look up mozillaignite.org. And they're also working in this area. They currently have very focused efforts going on in Kansas City and Chattanooga, two of the very earliest gigabit cities. They're looking at education performance and how they can improve education specifically. And we're very pleased to be working together with Mozilla Ignite, Carrie Keefe in Kansas City, Lindsay Frost in Chattanooga, Ben Moskowitz, and others with Mozilla. So they're also a partner in making some of these applications happen. You can find out a lot about these applications by going to our collaborative community exchange at www.us-ignite.org. And there will be a drop-down tab there for applications. And you're going to see, I checked last night, Drew, and I counted 114 that we've got there. That's more than 60, but some of these are just glints in the eye. We wanted even people who had very early beginnings of applications to be able to list them so that they could get additional support. But some of them are also quite mature. There's also a drop-down to show only the very mature ones, the ones you can run now, ones in development, ones that really need some other folks to help make that happen. I'll just notice the tile at the upper right there is for Proactive Sense from Foresight Health Monitoring. This is a company that was a startup that went commercial as a result of US Ignite activities. They started off with a US Ignite grant from the National Science Foundation, developed a product which they've now taken out of the NSF and are selling as a commercial service. We have 4 of those companies that have grown out of US Ignite so far, and I look forward to dozens to come to be able to make that happen and have that be effective. We're also working with the National Institute of Standards and Technology on their Global City Teams project. This is specifically a Smart America, Smart Cities project that meshes very, very well with what's going on. The National Science Foundation is also providing some funding specifically for the cyber physical systems, that is interacting between people and the computer. That's called cyber physical system, and that's being funded by the National Science Foundation. So, for example, they're currently running a Global City Teams Challenge. This Thursday and Friday in Gaithersburg, Maryland, there will be several dozen teams out of about 50 that have registered so far for the Global City Teams Challenge to talk about how they are helping to make cities smart by putting together various smart city technologies in combination. So the main idea in the Global City Teams Challenge is we now have a lot of capabilities. Let's put those capabilities together into systems. Let's get systems, and of course the beginning of ecosystems would be the long-range view here that will help with smart cities. And if you need my email address, this would be a great time to go write it down. This would be a great time that it's right up there on the chart that you can go and see it. I'd be glad to be in communication with anyone who has an interest in these smart applications, and that is our mission, to try to make sure that we have as many of these as valuable as possible. So let me talk about one of them that's being done out of Kansas City. This one happens to be being used on Google Fiber because that's the system they have in Kansas City. And it's for remote care. It's for people who may be living alone, maybe should be checked up on but don't want to be intruded upon. So the idea is that there's a Microsoft Connect box which is not only watching video in that home, but is also using the distance sensor to be able to detect things like how quickly is the person walking toward the Connect box or walking away. It can also go and look at the lower limbs and say, are they being bent appropriately, or is there a limp going on? If there's a limp, that might be a sign of a stroke and would require some attention. And very often stroke victims don't actually recognize themselves that they're having a stroke, and it requires somebody else to go and look at their face, arm, gait to be able to help understand that. And here we're able to help them with monitoring 24/7, but not by a person, by a computer that will not tell any of their secrets, but will nevertheless be there to help them if they need that. In Kansas City, the University of Missouri-Kansas City developed a fall detection algorithm based on this distance sensor plus the video sensor that's 99.6% accurate in detecting falls in the home. You don't have to go and reach and find some pendant that you may have lost or may not have on you. It can detect that within 2 seconds and be able to bring assistance. How is this a gigabit app? It turns out that the processing for this distance sensor generates a point cloud which is so complex it requires server-style capacity to be able to handle the data. So whenever it's receiving active motion information, then and only then does it stream the gigabit information to the server for the detection. So if you're just sitting in the chair, nothing is happening, no servers are being used, but if you fall, it detects a lot of motion and says we better analyze this motion to make sure it's not a bad fall that should be dealt with. Electric power board in Chattanooga, you see the little red and black dots there. Each of those represents a 1 or 2 block neighborhood that can be independently controlled and either have power or lose power and have their power fed from either end of the street. By using fiber optics and their gigabit network, here the bandwidth is not so important, but the latency is important. And so the ability to go and catch the power going out before it actually goes out means that they can isolate outages to the 1 or 2 blocks in which that outage is occurring and be able to feed all the other blocks in different directions. So they've been able to improve their power reliability in Chattanooga by a factor of 10 that I understand because of this ability to have this much better information about their electric power grid. Now, Drew, you should cut me off at any time here.
We still have time. I know you've got about a half dozen more, so
I can go over as many of those as we have time for.
So on each one.
You bet. Thanks, Drew. So this is an example of particulates at the 2.5 micron size. That's the size that lodges in your lungs and can cause the most damage. And a modeling that we're doing in conjunction with David Flary at the University of Texas, Dallas, based on satellite imagery, existing monitoring stations, and so forth. And you can see that he's developed quite a good model that involves 40-some variables that allows cities to predict what their pollution is going to be and to, for example, help staff emergency rooms who may need asthma specialists in particularly bad pollution times as being predicted, not after it's been detected, but before it's been detected. You can see that we live in a pretty good area out here, Drew, in Salt Lake City, although there is a little red spot here where some of our inversions come in the winter. That modeling involves such a big database that it's clearly a gigabit application to be able to do that interactively for the folks on planning who are doing that. This is a picture of a simulated Mars rover. This comes from MX Design in San Francisco, right near the Orange Studios there. This is a model that is a collaborative simulation that in virtual reality allows a whole classroom full of kids to go and control a simulated Mars rover and to see its behavior. Each kid, if they have an iPad, and many schools do have iPads per kid, can get control of one part of this rover. And so one child may be responsible for the drill, another positioning the arm, another positioning cameras and so forth. They can go and see if they can organize themselves to put this rover on a mission. and it's a great science project. I will tell you one of the most fascinating things is to give the 6 different wheels, and yes, you can count them. There are 6 wheels there to 6 different kids, and see if they can get it to drive in any given direction. I think connected collaboration is a really important application. It really falls into the #1 issue from the Pew report there, which was more rapid collaboration. In many video conferencing applications, and even in our conference today, there's going to be several hundred milliseconds of delay between when I speak and when you hear me. The idea in connected collaboration is to reduce that to below the level that you notice it. And that means below about 50 milliseconds. So the idea is to get folks who can work with each other as if they were in the same room. I was testing an early version of this. It's coming out of Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. We did a connected collaboration session from Salt Lake City here to Cleveland, Ohio. And we were testing out the audio and video and trying to make sure it was low latency and we were working well. And I suddenly found myself finishing a sentence of somebody in Cleveland. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. This doesn't happen. This doesn't happen over video conferencing. It happens when you're in the same room. But this could really change things. So I agree with Pew that that seems to be a really important way of making that happen. Processes. About half the cost of a 3D printer is in the control logic. What if we put that, and you don't use it all the time. Every 3D printer you've ever seen has probably been doing nothing at the time you saw it. What if we put that control logic in the cloud and be able to reduce the cost by half so that we can have a 3D printer in more places, being able to provide more value to more people? What we need for that is a highly reliable network, and of course that's something that you can do over a gigabit network by adding reliability capabilities, such as adding duplicate information to make sure that anything that is lost is replaced. Another one is in remote radiology. What you're looking at is a 6.3 gigabyte DICOM image. This is used by a radiologist to go and take a look to understand if anything is amiss. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, they had to have a radiologist on duty during the night to take care of any emergency victims that may come in, but the radiologist was largely otherwise not busy. They were able to go and let him sleep in his own bed by being able to transmit 6.3 gigabytes in 17 seconds to his home so that he could look at it on a rather expensive monitor. But the gigabit network in Chattanooga provided by the Electric Power Board was the key to making this remote radiology happen and have that be successful. In Kansas City, there's actually a branch manager whose title is the Digital Branch Library Manager. That's David LeCrone in Kansas City. And he has developed a public applications library so that you can borrow expensive apps that may help to cross the digital divide. Important question of how do we cross the digital divide? Take things that might be too expensive and allow them to be used on inexpensive devices. So you could go and take a $150, $200 Chromebook and be able to run full Photoshop off the servers in the public library. Now, to keep within license restrictions, you have to sign up for your hour of usage. You're the only one using that copy for that hour, so that we only have the one person per copy, just to keep like the licensing restrictions would like to have. But it means that they put on a course this past fall for students doing video editing. They would take video in their neighborhoods using their cell phones and then use Adobe Premiere to be able to put together high-quality films based on what they were able to take on their cell phones and then edit from the Kansas City Public Library. Well, why don't I stop there, Drew? I think there's a great number of applications. I'm going to hear more about them from Orange.
Well, and it's great to hear about some of the ones that are mature, or at least mature enough to be used in this capacity. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll, of course, take questions after we finish our presentations here. Next up is David Martin, and if we could go ahead and cue the slide there. David is in the strategy and development group at Orange Telecom's Orange Silicon Valley operation. He's had a dozen years in the technology industry and started the Giga Orange studio in San Francisco, as I understand it, David, just about a year ago. So let's go ahead and turn it over to you, David, to give us the consumer apps perspective on gigabit applications.
Thanks, Drew. Really appreciate that. I'm excited to be on the webinar today with Glenn and everyone. So, about a year ago, we started the Orange Giga Studio. So it's located in downtown San Francisco, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So, the team includes Anton Lapiche, who we came over from Bouygues Telecom, who's one of our competitors in France, and then Will Barkas, who we're very happy to have come over from Mozilla. So he was part of the original team that worked with Glenn on US Ignite. All right, so Orange was originally France Telecom. So we're essentially the AT&T of Europe. We bought the Orange brand a number of years ago, and so globally we have about 240 million customers. So we're a major or premier European ISP. I'm part of what's called Orange Silicon Valley. So we're located in downtown San Francisco. We have a number of initiatives that come out of OSV, including an accelerator program. We also have Orange Digital Ventures, which is a fund that was announced 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then we have the Orange Giga Studio. So our role in the Valley is really to explore new technologies that are coming out, engage with both startups. So we meet with about 500 startups a year, and then we try and push the best of breed over to France and to other countries where we have a presence. And then reimagining Orange through innovation. So what that really means is that we have a lot of visitors who come over from France, or they're our customers, and we try and inspire them with by giving demos and talking about what the latest technology is that's going on in the Valley. So Orange is a premium ISP in Europe, so we have fiber in 5 countries. Today we have 500,000 customers, 500,000 fiber customers in France, and that's growing at a very rapid rate. So fiber is an extremely important, it's extremely important to Orange's bottom line, and we anticipate that number is going to roughly double in 2015. So the Orange Giga Studio is located in downtown San Francisco. It's a gigabit workspace. That is, we have fiber piped into a conference room, and this room is available for tech companies, startups, developers, designers to come in and experiment with a gig. So it's free. There's no cost to any of the people who come in to experiment with a gig. It's a collaborative workspace. We have innovative hardware, so that includes things like Oculus Rift, a DK2. We've got a 4K screen. We've got several other virtual reality-related hardware that companies can experiment with. And then we have access to Orange's analysts and engineers that are physically located in the office. So why Orange Giga Studio? So we're in Silicon Valley because this is where a lot of the innovation happens globally. Obviously, fiber and ultra-fast broadband is a hot topic right now, and unlike other countries, we have fiber customers today, and we need to be able to differentiate our fiber offering both in France and the other 4 countries using different applications and services. So short term, our goal is to get as many companies and developers into the workspace as possible. And midterm, we're trying to find, again, the best of breed applications and services to distribute through our networks. So when you think about the fiber, you can really break the benefits of fiber down into 4 different areas. So the first is, as Glenn talked about, the finish your sentence experience. So that's dependent on low latency. And high bandwidth is another area. So if today there was an announcement about a standard for 8K television that was just being launched. So you can think about that and the possibility of that consuming a huge amount of bandwidth when you're streaming Netflix over 8K in, say, 5 or 6 years. And then symmetrical connection. So that what that means is that your upload and your download speed are the same. So you're not only consuming content, as in when you're downloading, but you're also publishing content or creating content for other people to consume. And the fourth piece is the quality of service. So Glenn touched on telemedicine. And so really having the stability, the reliability behind the connection, that's the benefit that that's speaking to. And I think Glenn also mentioned that there are applications across multiple verticals. So Orange and the Orange GigaStudio, we're focused on mass market consumer use cases, but we can see how these apply across multiple verticals. So entertainment, things like gaming, home, where you're going to be streaming 8K streams in only a few years' time. And then work and B2B, so large data transfiles, and education and healthcare. So for healthcare, you can imagine, again, Glenn showed an X-ray where you could have a specialist and a doctor discussing a patient's diagnosis. So these last couple of slides here, I want to give you some concrete examples of Orange GigaStudio partners. So even in France, in Orange France, there's kind of or at least in the past, there's been a question mark, like what can you actually do with a gig? And so we've been working on this for about a year, and this is a sampling of some of the gigabit apps or the gigabit partners that we have put on both events and also we can demo at the Orange GigaStudio. So NVIDIA has NVIDIA Grid, which is a cloud gaming solution. So this is where you can have a Chromebook, which is a very, very lightweight hardware, and all of the GPU computation can be done in the cloud. So essentially you're offloading all the hardware to the cloud, and it's a game, for instance, if you're driving a race car, is very dependent on a low latency experience. So you want that to be as smooth as possible. So NVIDIA has this grid solution, and they demoed at our event last year. Bubble is one of about 10 companies that are about to launch these 360-degree video cameras that can capture these immersive experiences. And you can imagine if that's being streamed into a consumer's home, that's going to take up a lot of bandwidth. And when you start to have a next-generation Skype or a live experience, latency is super important. I'm going to skip over the software lending library because Glenn covered it previously in his presentation. Netkind is Airbnb for computers. Essentially, it enables consumers who have computers at home that are doing nothing, basically 90% of the time. You can sell the compute from your computers to either, and there are interesting business models like the ability to reduce the cost of your hardware if you're selling compute, or you could reduce the cost, your monthly payment for fiber with a service like Netkind. So Musician Link offers online music collaboration. So this is great for bands that aren't necessarily physically located in the same location. And it's also for the after-work rock star. So someone who comes home and they just want to jam with someone online, but they only have an hour. They don't want to get in the car, load their equipment up, drive to a location so they can just play for a shorter time. Net Power and Light is sort of a next-generation Skype. It's group video conferencing where you can share a screen, and there's very, very low latency, so they can essentially sync the screen across multiple locations and multiple devices. So you can imagine a scenario where you and I watching Netflix together through Net Power and Light, or a doctor and an X-ray specialist are looking at an image together and seeing and trying to diagnose what's wrong with a patient. Big Blue Button is a video conferencing for MOOCs. So essentially what this enables is an online classroom where you could have up to 100 different students all with their own video stream. Another scenario for Big Blue Button is, let's say you're having a science experiment, you could place multiple cameras around that science experiment so that everyone could see the experiment from multiple angles. Finally, there's Video Pixie, which is a marketplace for movie editing. So if you have a lot of wedding footage or if you have home movies, you need the ability to upload a massive amount of video, and you're essentially outsourcing the editing of that footage. So you would upload numerous gigabytes of data. They would compile the video and make it available online for you. So again, we've gone through 8 examples. This is only a sample of the applications that we've had through the GigaStudio. Even executives in Orange, France, before they came over to the GigaStudio, didn't necessarily believe that there were gigabit applications. And after they've come to the GigaStudio, we've demoed these applications, or they've attended an event with multiple demos, they were persuaded that there are gigabit applications and that there are ways, specifically in our case, to differentiate Orange Fiber versus the competition. So lastly, I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter. And if you're in San Francisco, please consider this a formal invite to come and check out the GigaStudio. We'd be happy to demo some of these applications. It's one thing to talk about them, but when you can really get your hands on these applications and experience the difference, that's when you'll really be persuaded that there's an answer to the question, what can I do with a gig? So that's it for now.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Well, let's continue to invite your questions as an audience. We have about 20 minutes here where we can discuss and consider. Let me just turn it over for a moment to David Shaw, my colleague here, Kirton McConkie, if you'd like to say something or ask our 2 panelists some questions.
Yes, I certainly appreciate the panelists and their insight on what the current market trends are and possibly a glimpse into the future. I just wanted to respond briefly to one of the questions that we posed, and that is bandwidth a commodity? And one of the questions in response was, is water differentiated? So I just wanted to sort of draw that analogy out a little bit and pose the question, well, what if in your water pipe you could have plain water and you had lots of sub-pipes where you could order Kool-Aid and lemonade and root beer and Coke and Diet Coke and beer or whatever your favorite beverage happened to be? How or would that change your world? Maybe it wouldn't in your particular instance, but it might in your neighbors. And so really what we're talking about with bandwidth as a commodity is the ability to do that with all things virtual. And for instance, we spend a lot of money in business flying back and forth to meetings and conferences and so forth. What if we could all get around a conference table and joined by holographic video, where we saw each other as we are and it looked the same and it was all 3D and the only difference is you couldn't touch each other. And shoot, maybe that's coming too. I don't know. But imagine what that might do with our interpersonal relationships. Imagine what that would do if you could go by holographic video into a classroom at Harvard or MIT or wherever you happen to want to go to school but didn't want to move there. These are the sorts of things that require lots and lots of bandwidth that are actually out there being pursued by a variety of companies. There's a company in Amsterdam that has been pursuing video holographic imaging for some time, and so when we get to the concept of what would you do with your gig, it really the real question is, what do you want to do with it? And is a gig enough? Perhaps not. And so I'd like to pose the question to our panelists of, is a gig enough?
So this is Glenn, and of course a gig is not enough. We really want to be aiming higher. The reason we're aiming for a gig is because it's 100 times what people can typically get. Typically get 10 megabits. So a gigabit does a couple of magic things. It increases things by 2 orders of magnitude. 2 orders of magnitude is about the difference between the speed that you can ride a bicycle and a jet plane. 6 miles an hour versus 600 miles an hour. So it really changes things qualitatively. So a gigabit is something that people can imagine. It's something being talked about by AT&T, Gigapower, the gigabit from CenturyLink and Google Fiber and so forth. And yet it's a substantially different experience for folks over what they're currently having today. However, at our coming up meeting, March 24th, 25th in DC, go to www.us-ignite.org. You can come to a meeting where we're going to show you some beyond the gig applications. There's going to be a microscope demonstrated from the University of Southern California using seawater to go and allow people to remotely control that microscope. And it's going to be school kids in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So they're going to be able to move the stage, pan the stage, change the magnification. And of course, do we want to look at it in HD? No, we want to look at that microscope in 4K. So there's a 4K driver for the microscope. It's called a cinema microscope because it's the same as that you get on very high quality cinema. And those kids are going to be able to look through that microscope. It's going to look just like a microscope that you run next to them today, except that thanks to the gigabit, it's going to be across country. And that's a 2 gigabit application, 2 gigabits in order to be able to make that work. And so I think it's a frontier that's a great line that we've got for ourselves now. Once we become habituated to a gigabit, I think we're pushing it further.
And so just to be a bit provocative,
Please.
then I suppose the FCC's new definition of broadband suffices.
Well, you bring up, of course, a sore point. Maybe I should let David in on this, but FCC was pressured to have a very low definition of broadband. I believe the most recent on file is 0.5 megabit is broadband as far as the FCC is concerned. And of course, that's nowhere close to what the rest of us would consider to be broadband. Do you have any comments, David?
From Orange's perspective, I can't really comment on the FCC, but what I would say is that we had Susan Crawford at our event last September, and she talked about human presence being the killer app for gigabit. And the way that you're going to, technically, the way you're going to achieve that kind of experience is by throwing out the compression in video, getting rid of the compression. And that's in order to have a super low latency, high resolution experience where you literally feel like you're in the same room. And you need more than a gigabit for that application.
So we've got, thank you, David, and thank you, Glenn. We've got a couple of specific questions, and then I'd like to lead us through some more general ones, but just specifically, these are from our audience. For video, entertainment, or voice Skype applications, what are the max network latency targets for good performance? Glenn and David?
So people can detect down to about 50 milliseconds. So you would know the difference between something that is delayed by 50 milliseconds. But below that, you can actually do some interesting things. You can do simultaneous musical performance from remote locations. You can do simultaneous art drawing. You can bring people together in these kinds of seamless, human presence scenarios like Susan Crawford has talked about. And so that's kind of a magic number. And it's also an attainable number. There have been several demonstrations going halfway across the country where you've had people playing together, singing together, and having those be artistic performances where the artists were communicating with one another, they were slowing down, they were speeding up, all in conjunction with making a very profound musical statement. We also think that's important if you've got remote surgery going on. We want that remote knife to stop immediately when you stop at the control station and not to keep going because of the delay.
Has there been any remote surgery to date that you're aware of, Glenn?
There's been no real surgery. The Da Vinci machine is capable of it because the control station is separated from the actual Da Vinci surgery machine, but it has, of course, very low latency. There are a couple of experiments that they're doing, not with real patients yet, but to take that control station of the Da Vinci machine and separate it from the actual surgery device so that a surgeon in one location can conduct it in another location. It's not been performed on real human beings yet.
David, do you have anything you'd like to add on that one?
No, I don't have anything to add right.
Okay. On the question of maturity and mature applications, you started off on this, Glenn, talking about those that are there. And I'd like to maybe segment our conversation into applications that cities and public institutions are going to be most focused on, applications on businesses that are considering locating in a city with gigabit connectivity, like what are the apps that are out there that are going to drive a business to say, I want to be in Chattanooga or Kansas City or West Valley City, Utah, because there's a gigabit network there, right? And then finally the consumer applications, right? And it's neat to have that, but are those on hold until we have a mass market of gigabit customers? So let's let Glenn go first on this one here.
Well, lots of good questions there wrapped into one giant question. So I think that it's been very clear that information-based businesses have an advantage being in a gigabit city. They can develop their applications very rapidly because of the responsiveness they can get from their local clouds. And they can also demonstrate to their customers that they can eliminate a lot of the delay that's involved in those kinds of applications. So for example, a new company in Kansas City called Viditor that's doing this kind of video editing in the cloud is in Kansas City because it is a gigabit city. But I think that beyond that information-based orientation, there's a whole lot that comes from the ability to operate less expensively because of efficiencies in building HVAC systems, in using less water, in conserving natural resources, and being able to really make a green difference that a lot of companies want to make. And the kinds of information feedback loops that we can get from the increased number of sensors we've got in smart cities is really making that possible. There's really four really key areas. There's water, there's energy, there's air, and there's waste management. And in those four areas...
So like the four elements, right?
Well, air, fire, and water, yes, absolutely. We can call those the new four. Thank you, Drew. I appreciate that. I'm going to use that next time. Knowing more about those can really help businesses operate less expensively, be able to attract high-quality employees who care about the quality of their environment. And then the last thing you mentioned was what will it take to get to a mass market scale? And I think it's going to be to aggregate the existing gigabit cities we've got. We've got a growing number of gigabit cities. You mentioned the Google gigabit cities, but there's also a number of AT&T gigabit cities, Sure West in California and Missouri. Right here in Utah, the Daybreak community is all fiber, done by CenturyLink. So I think that it's going to be to aggregate these folks together into a common market so that somebody who's a startup can go and sell their applications into and aggregate it so that gigabit communities. So in this next phase of US Ignite, our primary objective is to do that aggregation, to put in a common applications platform so that you could run it in one city, you could run it in another city, and to interconnect the cities so that an entrepreneur taking a look at their marketplace says, my marketplace is not just Kansas City, it's all across the country where there are gigabit capabilities.
David Martin, what are you seeing on the businesses and their, obviously you're not as necessarily focused on the municipalities, but for the businesses, are they looking at this from a business to business or from a consumer driven, and how do they respond to this question Glenn's just added onto?
Yeah, so honestly, I'm less focused on the business angle, but from fiber is an investment at the community level, right? So there's a couple of different pieces to this. So communities are making a choice, a decision to invest in fiber. So the people within that community have elected to make that decision. The second is there's the fact that there's fiber in the community draws businesses because they can locate their company in an environment that's much cheaper, but also globally connected. So at this point, they can do business in the middle of the United States just as well as they can do it in San Francisco, for instance. So the third piece to that is really the low latency. So because you've created a fiber network, latency is lowest within that network. So a lot of these applications and services, such as telepresence, can save people time within their community because you will have the ability to quickly connect, for instance, with your healthcare provider, with your music teacher, with a counselor, for instance.
Thank you. We've got. Was there anything else there, David?
I can talk more. I can speak more to the consumer angle. I think some of the applications exist today. So I've talked about NVIDIA Grid. Until you've truly experienced an HD, a 1080p, 60 frames per second gaming experience that's 100% run over the cloud, then you don't really understand the power of the gig.
Right. There's a lot of direct experience here, and I think that's what's so important about this. We've got a good flow of questions here. Let me get some of these out here so we can get to them from our panelists. Should cities consider infrastructure benefits of gigabit beyond just supporting new businesses, such as improving traffic flows to make communities easier for new businesses and or remote services, healthcare? Let me just start on this one. This was one of the things that Aurora, Illinois actually used its gigabit network for first, was precisely this, managing and improving traffic flows. And it got a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation together with the Illinois Gigabit Community Challenge that was instrumental in helping it to leverage this gigabit network for those 5 purposes up there. Glenn and David, you want to take a stab at that point of benefits beyond supporting new businesses?
Well, let me just add on to your transportation example, yes and amen, and think about the kinds of infrastructure and fiber we're going to need along major roadways to do vehicle-to-infrastructure, vehicle-to-vehicle communications in the future. So I think any investment in that kind of infrastructure is going to help in lots of areas, including transportation.
Good. We have a question here about, and I'd love your reaction to this one, David. At 1 gigabit per second, a 1,500 byte packet is 12.5 microseconds. Propagation delay dominates serialization delay. He's saying, given that for latency and throughput sensitive applications, isn't a gigabit beyond the point of diminishing returns? David?
So if you do not compress a 1080p, I mean, it's a little bit technical, but if you choose not to compress a 1080p stream, it's going to be well over a gig. So if you work out 1080p, 60 frames per second, that kind of a telepresence experience based on our experience at the Giga Studio will actually saturate a gig and crash the network.
It was kind of a technical question, so I'm going to give you a technical answer, which is if 1,500 bytes was all you needed to transmit, that would be fine. Most of the things we now need to go and send that need low latency are, for example, an entire frame of a person's violin bow, so that we can go and see, is that bow beginning to come down at the other end so the violins can play together. So I agree that you've got very low latency, and in fact, I like to think of a gigabit city as sort of a millisecond city because of the low latency being so important. But the real answer is it takes more than 1,500 bytes, which is what David was also talking about.
Of course. We got a question about adaptive manufacturing and how decentralization comes into play. This is something I've thought about quite a bit with 3D printing, is the ability to do very short runs of manufacturing. But these files are monster files. I mean, just getting access to them. They're not emailable by current standards. Talk a little bit about advanced manufacturing, Glenn.
Well, Drew, it's not only just the description files, it's as actually made and fitting together parts that may have very slight differences in tolerance from what you'd exactly like to have. To make other parts that fit, you'd like to go and make adaptive manufacturing so that the other parts will fit with the ones that you've already made. So even though you may have parts being made in different locations, you need high bandwidth communications between them so that they can adapt the parts to each other, so that when you put them together, Drew, in some central location, they actually all fit and they all work very smoothly together.
Good. We got one more question here that deals with, it's maybe a bit more general, so invite everyone's reactions. As a municipality begins looking to the private sector to manage gigabit networks, how many companies out there are qualified, done it before, and likely to be around for many years, and what are the most important questions to ask to differentiate among qualified private operator candidates? David Shaw, would you like to address that one?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess the answer is there have been several over the years, that some of which are still around, some have come and gone. And so I think the more important side of the question is, what should you be asking? And I would submit that it's just like perhaps when you hire an employee, where have you worked before? What have you done? Demonstrate to me that you actually know what you're doing. Make sure that on the interview team you have somebody who is technical and who knows the right questions to ask to get the right answers. And then most importantly, I think I would focus to some degree on some solvency or security. What happens if they don't perform, and what's the fallback plan? Do you hire somebody else? Do you bring it in-house? Do you simply go belly out? These are models that have been pursued by a variety of networks to some degree of success in each case, except the belly up model, which I'm not so sure has been successful. And so I would focus a lot of time and attention on the staffing of those entities, and that's assuming we want to go with a private operator, which is a big assumption.
We are at the end of our hour, and we appreciate your time, and for those of you, almost all of you have stuck with us. Let me give David Martin a chance to offer any closing thoughts and or react to any of the questions, and then to Glenn before we mention our next week's and final webinar. So David Martin, any final points you'd like to make?
I think I would stress again that I'm constantly hearing this question: what can you do with a gig? And again, a lot of the executives in France have the same question. You're like, are there truly gigabit applications? And the answer definitively is yes. So if you have plans to visit San Francisco, I encourage you to reach out. So my email is david1.martin@orange.com, and we'd be happy to host you at the Giga Studio and walk you through some of the applications.
So this is Glenn, and I'd just like to piggyback on that and say I think it is well worth visiting the Orange Studio. I encourage you to do that if you're on the left coast. If you're on the right coast in March, I encourage you to come to the US Ignite Application Summit. You can find out more about that at www.us-ignite.org. For all those cities out there thinking about what good is a gig, it really depends on your city. It depends on your circumstances. I think it behooves each city to develop a playbook of the things that are going to be most important to them, the values that they really want to get out of it. We've given you a lot of examples, but it's going to be individualized and specific to community. What energizes your base? What can you find some support and funding to do, both civically, maybe from a local foundation, your local developer community, maybe a local large industry? It's going to be those applications that will be the most important ones to you.
Thank you so much. We've been through 3/4 of our webinar series now. Our first one on the 27th of January was avoiding mistakes before you begin, and we had Masha Zager of Broadband Communities, Zane Logan of Powell, Wyoming, and David Everton of Municipal Solutions, and they gave some concrete advice on the things that municipalities want to avoid as they get into planning. We talked in week 2, February 3rd, on lessons from success stories, and we heard from Deb Socia of Next Century Cities, Andrew Cohill of Danville, Virginia, and Bruce Patterson of Ammon, Idaho. And we talked a little bit about some of the planning that goes into ensuring a successful broadband build. Now, this topic here is in some ways future-looking, but I think that Glenn Reichert of US Ignite and David Martin of Orange Telecom have shown it's not future at all. It's here and now. There are gigabit applications. They can be an important selling point for you as you begin your gigabit networks. And next week, February 17th, our last one, will be resources for municipalities. And we're going to talk about the things you need on your team as you get your financing together, as you work to build public-private partnerships. What are some of the key people and players that you'll need as you plan your gigabit networks? We look forward to joining you for our last webinar. The slides and video of these will be available and posted very soon. Unless there's anything anyone would like to add, we appreciate your time being with us today, and we will see you next week at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, and the webinar is concluding.